Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Madam Vice President, this year we face extraordinary tests of our values and our resolve. In responding to the aggression against one of our member states, the Ukraine, in seeking peace in the Middle East, in dealing with the terrifying spread of the Ebola virus in West Africa, and in overcoming what I want to focus on today, which is the mortal threat we all face from the rise of ISIL in Syria and Iraq. Al-Zor is a province in eastern Syria.
We'll see the Right Honourable David Cameron, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Madam Vice President, this year we face extraordinary tests of our values and our resolve. In responding to the aggression against one of our member states, the Ukraine, in seeking peace in the Middle East, in dealing with the terrifying spread of the Ebola virus in West Africa, and in overcoming what I want to focus on today, which is the mortal threat we all face from the rise of ISIL in Syria and Iraq. Al-Zor is a province in eastern Syria, home to the Al-Shatat tribe. It was captured by ISIL last month. 700 tribesmen were executed, many were beheaded. The vast majority were civilians, Muslims, who refused to take an oath of allegiance to ISIL's Sikh extremist worldview, and who paid for this with their lives. They are not alone. Across Syria and northern Iraq, thousands have suffered the same fate. Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, Christians, Yazidis, people of every faith and none. ISIL is not a problem restricted to just one region. It has murderous plans to expand its borders well beyond Iraq and Syria, and to carry out terrorist atrocities right across the world. It is recruiting new fighters from all over the world. 500 have gone there from my country, Britain, and one of them almost certainly brutally murdered 2 American journalists and a British aid worker. This is a problem that affects us all, and we must tackle it together. Now, there is not one person in this hall who will view this challenge without reference to the past, whether in Iraq, whether in Afghanistan. Now, of course, it is absolutely right that we should learn lessons. Especially what happened in Iraq a decade ago. But we have to learn the right lessons. Yes to careful preparation. No to rushing to join a conflict without a clear plan. But we must not be so frozen with fear that we don't do anything at all. Isolation and withdrawing from a problem like ISIL will only make matters worse. We must not allow past mistakes to become an excuse for indifference or inaction. The right lesson is that we should act, but act differently. We should be comprehensive, defeating the ideology of extremism that is the root cause of this terrorism, so that we win the battle of ideas, not just the battle of military might. We should be intelligent, supporting representative and accountable governments and working with them for their requests, not going in over their heads.
No,
we should be
working with partners in the region
It's bloody Warwick.
prepared to be part of
It's bloody Warwick travel resource which are
potentially
bugging me.
including Iran. And we should be uncompromised, using all the means at our disposal, including military force, to hunt down these extremists. Let me take each of these in turn. The root cause of this terrorist threat is a poisonous ideology of Islamist extremism. This has nothing to do with Islam, which is a peaceful religion which inspires countless acts of generosity every day. Islamist extremism, on the other hand, believes in using the most brutal forms of terrorism to force people to accept a warped worldview and to live in a quasi-medieval state. To defeat ISIL and organizations like it, we must defeat this ideology in all its forms. As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification. We know this worldview. The peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot, or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged. The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy. The concept of an inevitable clash of civilizations. We must be clear, to defeat the ideology of extremism, we need to deal with all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism. For governments, there are some obvious ways we can do this. We must ban preachers of hate from coming to our country. We must prescribe organizations that incite terrorism against people at home and abroad. We must work together to take down illegal online material like the recent videos of ISIL murdering hostages. And we must stop the so-called non-violent extremists from inciting hatred and intolerance in our schools, our universities, and yes, even our prisons. Of course, some will argue that this is not compatible with free speech and intellectual inquiry. But I ask you, would we sit back and allow right-wing extremists, Nazis or Ku Klux Klansmen to recruit on our university campuses? No. So we shouldn't stand by and just allow any form of non-violent extremism. We need to argue that prophecies of a global war of religion pitting Muslims against the rest of the world, these things are nonsense. We need Muslims and their governments around the world to reclaim their religion from these sick terrorists, as so many are doing, and quite rightly.
Are you sure you want to do a
We all need help, and to help them with programs that channel young people away from these poisonous ideologues. And we need the strongest possible international focus on tackling this ideology, which is why here at the United Nations, the United Kingdom is calling for a new special representative on extremism. But fighting extremism will never be enough. Communism wasn't defeated simply by pointing out its flaws, but by showing that the alternative, economic freedoms, democracy, the rule of law, these things could build a better society and a better world. Young people need to see the power of a different, better, more open, more democratic path. The 20th century taught us the vital role of representative and accountable governments in offering their people opportunity, hope and dignity. Of course we should not be naive. Not every country can move at the same speed or even reach the same destination. And we should respect different cultures and traditions and histories. But let's be clear, the failure to meet people's aspirations can create a breeding ground where extremist and even terrorist insurgency can take root. Governments that only govern for some of their people cause deep resentment. In Iraq, the failure of the al-Maliki government to represent all of the people has driven some of them into the arms of extremists. Too often, people have been faced with a false choice between an autocratic and unrepresentative government on the one hand, or a brutal insurgency with religion misused as its rallying point on the other. To combat this, we must support the building blocks of free and open societies. In Iraq, This means supporting the creation of a new and genuinely inclusive government, capable of uniting all Iraqis, Sunni, Shia and Kurd, Christians and others. In Syria, it must mean a political transition and an end to Assad's brutality. Now I know there are some who think that we should do a deal with Assad in order to defeat ISIL. But I think this view is dangerously misguided. Our enemy's enemy is not our friend, it is another enemy. Doing a deal with Assad will not defeat ISIL because the bias and the brutality of the Assad regime was and is one of the most powerful recruiting tools for the extremists. Syria needs what Iraq needs, an inclusive, representative, democratic government that can look after the interests of all its people. So to those who have backed Assad or have stood on the sidelines, I would say this: